Venezuela, they're in cahoots with the Maduro regime. They're exporting terrorism to America, to the American hemisphere, and then they want these Hezbollah and Hamas to get their guys into the United States. So Hamas and Iran's and its proxies are a threat not only to us, but to Israel, all America's allies in the Middle East, and to America itself.
Now, I had no intention of doing an episode today, but apparently we're out conquering dictators in the middle of the night on a Friday, so Saturday episode is what you get. Hope you enjoy it. I've been trying to get to the bottom of this story, and I've been trying to get some decent coverage, and everything I've looked at has been so I'm going to connect some dots that apparently no one else is seeing right now, and I think that this is actually what's really happening here. And this is going to seem far-fetched at first, but stick with me as we get towards the end. It'll make a lot of sense, and it won't take me long, so just bear with me.
Do you have a New Year's resolution?
I have. Peace on earth.
So that's Donald Trump just a couple days ago on New Year's Eve at Mar-a-Lago, where Bibi Netanyahu was present, and he's saying to the press standing there, "Do you have any New Year's resolutions, President Trump?" And he says, peace on earth. And then 48 hours later, we're lighting up a sovereign country. Look, I'm not going to give you the whole libertarian anti-war spiel. You guys already know how I feel about this. I'm a non-interventionist. I'm an America First guy. I'm sincere in that. I have no interest in doing any of this nation-building, regime change stuff. So I'm going to spare you the sermon and just tell you what I think is actually happening, because I think that's what really matters here.
So we are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition.
We are going to run the country. That is regime change along with nation building to a certain extent. We'll see how much of an extent it ultimately is, but there's a connection here that is really important. It's going to seem very disparate and almost far-fetched, but I promise you there's a lot of merit to this argument. Over the past 72 hours or so, probably a couple days prior to that, there has been widespread protests in Iran. And the protesters there have been reports of some of them being killed. It's terrible, obviously. As you know, Bibi Netanyahu has been champing at the bit to take out the Iranian leadership forever. And he's been arguing in favor of the American government, American military, doing it on their behalf forever, like literally my entire life.
If not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months.
They have the wherewithal, the stored up, preserved knowledge to make a bomb very quickly if they wanted to do it.
Iran is so dangerous. Weeks away from having the fissile material for an entire arsenal of nuclear bombs.
They're very close. They're 6 months away from being about 90% of having the enriched uranium for an atom bomb.
Iran is gearing up to produce 25 bombs, atomic bombs a year, 250 bombs in a decade.
Ladies and gentlemen, time is running out.
Iran will be capable of producing alone, without importing anything, nuclear bombs within 3 to 5 years.
He's been advocating for that since the 80s. It's insane. But the banking institutions in Iran are under such immense pressure, largely because of the sanction regime, but also after the bombing campaign by both Israel and the United States last summer. There is now a memo circulating that was just leaked amongst the banking institutions within Iran that essentially says that there's a very significant danger of there being some sort of banking collapse or a collapse of the power grid. And they just say, make sure you keep the money going out to the citizens. Essentially, it seems as if they're very fearful of there being a revolt. And when it comes to U.S. State Department and foreign policy, what they describe as soft power, aka sanctions, is actually very vicious. And it's very, oftentimes people don't understand what the purpose of sanctions are. They argue that it's to weaken the regime. What does it actually do, though? What does the CIA want it to do when the State Department does those things? Well, in reality, what it creates is immense financial strain on the citizenry, which then rise up against their government because they're starving, oftentimes. And then the regime is forced to either put them down or make nice with the West so that we lower the sanctions so that the economy starts to improve so that the people don't overthrow the government there. So really the purpose of the sanctions is not so much to free or liberate the people of Iran, but rather to make their lives so miserable that they rise up, that then causes the regime to crack down, which then gives casus belli for our military to intervene. That is actually what soft power sanctions create. So what happened 3 days ago? Well, the Trump administration, Donald Trump himself, came out and said that they stand ready again to strike Iran. What also happened? Well, these widespread protests within Iran start to heat up and they start to be put down. Then you've got the former head of the CIA under Donald Trump, appointed in 2017, tweeting out on January 2nd, "Happy New Year's Eve to every Iranian in the streets, also to every Mossad agent walking beside them." So is it fair to assume that we're witnessing a color revolution within Iran? Well, if you believe the former head of the CIA, yes, that's exactly what we're witnessing. So what does that mean? Well, it means that it's likely that regime change is in fact happening within Iran over the next few months. What would that create as a consequence? Well, if the Iranian leadership decides to fight back, which, contrary to popular belief, they actually have a tremendous ability to do so. And it would require American boots on the ground if you really want to topple them, unless you get some sort of revolution from within and some military faction overthrows the existing leadership. That's all possible. But I'm saying if you want to use hard power, military might to take out Iran, you're going to have American boots on the ground in Iran. And if you do that, how do you think that the Iranian regime is going to respond? Well, obviously, they're going to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Why is that relevant? Why does that connect to Venezuela? Bear with me and you'll understand. Approximately 20% of global oil trade goes through the Strait of Hormuz every single year. Guess which nation is also capable of producing about 20% of the global oil production? Well, that would be Venezuela. So if, in fact, I am reading these tea leaves correctly, and if, in fact, it is imminent that Israel and the U.S. is going to, in some form or fashion, topple the leadership within Iran, knowing that it is highly probable that they will then shut down the Strait of Hormuz and basically skyrocket the price of oil, wouldn't it be nice if we had access to 20%, an additional 20% of global oil production in one Venezuela? Yeah, that would be ideal. Additionally, landing on the ground in Venezuela just hours before this invasion extraction thing was to take place was a delegation from China. There was a Chinese delegation of politicians on the ground to meet specifically with Nicolas Maduro. Just hours later, our troops, our special forces are on the ground kidnapping the leader of Venezuela, the guy they intended to meet with, along with his wife, putting them on a Chinook and getting them back to New York City to face charges for drug trafficking or whatever. So what had happened over the past 20 years is that, well, Venezuela had basically fallen into despair thanks to communism and terrible economic policy. They had started to shift their oil production and their sales, their exports, to nations other than America. Why? Because America was not very friendly with them, and they don't like us, we don't like them. So they start to ship their oil exports to China. Why does that matter? Well, it's our hemisphere. And we don't like having any sort of foreign influence, especially major foreign influence, like a major power's foreign influence, in our hemisphere. It's essentially the Monroe Doctrine, which was actually originally created to deal with European influence within our hemisphere. Well, now it's called the Trump Doctrine, I guess, Trump-Roe Doctrine, if you will, where they're just saying you can't have any influence from China, Russia, whoever else, or Iran for that matter, in our hemisphere. And I think that's what we're witnessing. I think that that's the reason that they're doing this. And I think that the ultimate reason is because Bibi Netanyahu on New Year's Eve basically talked to Trump, and they concocted this plot saying, look, I don't care what you say. We're moving on Iran, Trump. We're going to do it. So get on board or get ran over, essentially. And then they say, but we'll back you in your conquest of Venezuela. Additionally, another incentive for this was that there was a lot of American oil companies, the big boys, that had put oil wells within Venezuela that had been taken by the Venezuelan government because it became communist and they just absorbed all international investments there. So this benefits Trump in a multitude of ways. First, it increases oil supply lines if there in fact is going to be a war in Iran, which would shut down the Strait of Hormuz and therefore cause a massive spike in oil prices, but also because it reclaims a bunch of investment capital for some of Trump's biggest donors, no doubt, with ExxonMobil, et cetera. So if I'm reading this correctly, and in fact we are preparing for some sort of conquering of Iran, instead of lecturing you from my libertarian bona fides and, just browbeating you into the ground, let's listen to a guy who used to really be pretty significantly anti-war. Let's see if he can convince you.
The worst mistake that the United States has ever made, in my opinion, was going into the Middle East. It's a quagmire. We're up to close to $8 trillion, but we're now acting as police. We're doing jobs that other countries should be doing. We're doing jobs, frankly, that Europe should be doing. We're doing jobs that Russia should be doing, that Iran should be doing, that Iraq, Turkey, Syria should be doing. They should be doing this. We shouldn't be doing it. We're 7,000 miles away.
That was Donald Trump 6 years ago. That was Donald Trump 5 years ago and 7 years ago and 8 years ago. He has said that consistently. It was actually one of his favorite talking points. It was actually one of the things that made me actually look at him in a somewhat fond fashion. An acknowledgement of the obvious truth that, in fact, yes, one of the biggest mistakes America has ever made, and arguably the biggest, was the decision after 9/11 to go into Iraq, to go into Afghanistan, to basically commit ourselves to the Middle East in a way that was catastrophic for us, economically, morally, principally, in terms of blood and treasure. It was a catastrophe and predicated off of lies. So instead of me trying to convince you, President Trump, not to do this, I'm going to just play you your own words, because I tend to think that you only actually listen to yourself anyway. So maybe you can convince you that this current iteration of you is a catastrophe, that to risk our blood and treasure again on behalf of Israel, because let's not bullshit ourselves. That's exactly what this is. This is not about our national interests. This is not about our national defense. That's for sure. This is not about the American people. This is about Israel. This is about Bibi Netanyahu. This has almost nothing to do with us. There might be some knock-on effects to the largest oil companies in America, and I guess that's some silver lining if you're invested in Exxon or whatever, but I'm not, and I don't really care. And just to demonstrate to you how totally abandoned the non-interventionist MAGA movement is at this junction, you've got Jeb Bush in the middle of the night commending Donald Trump for his fierce and hardline stance taken against both Venezuela and Iran, but explicitly Iran. So you've got the Bush family, which for those that don't know, despise Donald Trump, despise him, commending him because he's now doing their bidding, because he's on their team now. And if he's on the Bush team, he is not on your team. It couldn't be more clear. Now, was it impressive? Was it impressive that you can go in there and take out the leader of a sovereign nation, particularly a very sizable nation, particularly the head of a narco-terrorist unit? It was in less than 2 hours. Less than 2 hours, they get him and his wife out there. We don't lose any troops. Very impressive, right? Well, I want you to think about this. If this guy is in fact such an existential threat to our country that you need to invade and extract him without a declaration of war from Congress or an authorized use of military force, you can't risk that. It's too dangerous. We would lose soldiers. So you got to go in there, guns blazing, without any sort of constitutional authority to do so. And you do it and you get him out. But wait, this guy's the head of a narco-terrorist unit. Do you think that you could take out the head of the Sinaloa cartel or any major cartel without a shot being fired? Because that's really what happened. Yeah, we dropped a lot of bombs, but in terms of the reporting right now as to how they got Maduro and his wife out of there was no shots fired. So I want you to ask yourself, do you think that our special forces are just so elite that they were actually able to go into basically the presidential palace and pull this dude out without a shot being fired? Or what's the more likely answer? There was already a negotiated agreement that this was a face-saving maneuver from the Trump administration because our military has looked so bad after the Afghanistan withdrawal, the 20 years in Afghanistan, the Iraq war, all of the wars that we participated in have essentially been disastrous for decades now. And they're like, we need a win. We need a, early 1990s Iraq war, one that we can actually look powerful to the rest of the world. So what do you say? You probably call up Maduro and they say, look, we're coming in. This is going to be a decapitation strike. You can either accept your fate or you turn yourself over. We'll take you and your wife. We'll charge you in New York. Maybe they'll end up extraditing him, or they'll end up giving him some sort of sweetheart deal to testify against the Democrat Party in America somehow. I'm sure there's some sort of corruption there that he's participated in. Maybe that's the angle here. But I personally, just being honest, I sincerely doubt that we're just so good at what we do. We got in and out of there. I mean, even in the early 2000s, when we were a much stronger country, we still had to go to war to get Saddam. And it took like months, if not a year, to actually get the guy. So 2 hours? Consider me skeptical on that part. And instead of me convincing you what a bad idea this is, again, President Trump, let's listen to your DNI. The Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, just a couple of years ago, had this to say about Venezuela.
The old Washington way of thinking is something we hope is in the rearview mirror and something that has held us back for too long. For decades, our foreign policy has been trapped in a counterproductive and endless cycle of regime change or nation building. It was a one-size-fits-all approach of toppling regimes, trying to impose our system of governance on others, intervene in conflicts that were barely understood, and walk away with more enemies than allies. The results: trillions spent, countless lives lost, and in many cases a creation of greater security threats. The rise of Islamist terrorist groups like ISIS. President Trump was elected by the American people to put an end to this. And from day one, he has showed a very different way to conduct foreign policy.
So as Tulsi Gabbard says, that was the old way of doing things. And Donald Trump was elected by the American people to stop doing that. And he hasn't. He is doing the exact same thing. This is a repackaging of the neoconservatism of George Bush. It's really just a continuation of the neocon, neoliberal alliance that was perpetuated by both Barack Obama and Biden in the interim. So what can we glean from that? What's the takeaway? Well, the takeaway is this. We don't get to control our government. We don't actually get to vote for change. It's not possible to change this paradigm. Whoever you elect, as evidenced over the past 4 different presidents, not even presidencies, but 4 different presidents over the past multiple decades, as we're voting for. I mean, even when we voted for George Bush, people forget this, he ran on being the peace candidate. Barack Obama, hope and change, also ran on being the peace president. Joe Biden, similar, not as outgoing with the pro-peace stuff, but he, again, talked as if he was interested in peace. And then Donald Trump, the worst betrayal of all, the guy who overtly, explicitly repudiated the Bush regime, who repudiated the Bush doctrine to Jeb Bush in South Carolina.
It was a mistake. The war in Iraq, we spent $2 trillion, thousands of lives. We don't even have it. Iran is taking over Iraq with the second largest oil reserves in the world. Obviously, it was a mistake. So George Bush made a mistake. We can make mistakes, but that one was a beauty. We should have never been in Iraq. We have destabilized the Middle East. You call it whatever you want. I want to tell you, they lied. They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and they knew there were none.
A moment that really put Donald Trump on the map and differentiated him from his competitors in his very first election, which ultimately led to his victory and his first presidency. He has abandoned that rhetoric because I don't know why. He's blackmailed, I would assume, or his life has been threatened, or he was a fraud from day one. Take your pick. It doesn't really matter. The outcome is the same. We are continuing to do these things that have been disastrous for our country. And while I hope, and I mean this sincerely, I hope that the outcome of Maduro being toppled in Venezuela will be to the benefit of both America and the Venezuelan people, obviously. Maduro's a piece of I'm not fond of him by any stretch of the imagination, and it pains me to even come across as if I'm defending some sort of communist leader, because that's not what I'm doing here. I'm not particularly fond of Putin or Gaddafi or Assad or any of these people that I sound as if I'm defending from time to time, just simply because I'm advocating against intervention. But that's the same thing I'm doing here. I hope, to the bottom of my heart, I hope that the outcome for the Venezuelan people is an improvement of their standard of living. It'd be hard for it to get worse because it has been really, really rough for them for a very long time. But if the examples that I detailed just a second ago, When it comes to Libya, it's Syria, a bunch of other nations that we toppled, regime changed. What was the outcome? It wasn't an improvement in the standard of living for the people. It was oftentimes civil war, destitution, death. It was terrible. And what was the consequence for the Western nations that were near that area, Europe? It was a invasion, a migrant flood of refugees from those very nations that we needlessly toppled. And really the most galling aspect of all of this is that Anthony Fauci still walks free. Is that so many, the Biden administration writ large walks free. The fact that the Bush administration, any of the war criminals in our history, they walk free. The fact that the Somali fraudsters walk free, the fact that the politicians that greenlit the corruption within Minnesota, they all walk free. The fact that the entire COVID regime walks free. The fact that the people who set up the J6ers walk free. The fact that every single corrupt politician in this country continues to remain free. The fact that inflation remains high and deportations remain low. The fact that almost every single campaign promise that would be to the benefit of you and I, the American people, has not been followed through on. But yet, when they want something, when DC wants something, when the military industrial complex wants something, when Bibi Netanyahu wants something, they get it immediately. And that's how you know we don't run this country. And that should piss you off. I'm going to end it there so I can enjoy my Saturday, enjoy my weekend. So I just want to say Donald Trump, the neocons, Bibi Netanyahu, and everybody else that's taking advantage of this country. It's a tragedy. And ultimately, I believe you will pay a price for it in this life or the next. You. If you want to support my work, go to @LibertyLockPod on X. That was quite a transition. @LibertyLockPod on X. I will subscribe there. I will follow you back. LibertyLockdown.locals.com. Hit the like button, subscribe, share the show around. And let's hope that I'm wrong, that we aren't about to have a regime change war in Iran. Because if you think that's going down as easy as it did in Iraq or Venezuela or any other nation, you're going to find out the hard way. That's a serious power, and it's going to be a real war, and we haven't had one in a long time. So let's hope, and let's voice our opposition while we can, because I think that's what's next. See you.
Last night, I was on my buddy Clint Russell's podcast, Liberty Lockdown. Clint Russell, by the way, criminally underrated. He's great. So it was me, him, and Ian Carroll, and we did.
Yeah, it was trending. You guys were trending.
Yeah.